She knocked on the doors of a vampire king's mansion selling candles to save her dying mother. But when the iron gates creaked open and the 6-year-old stepped into the candlelit hall, she saw something that made time itself stop. A portrait. Her mother's face, younger, smiling, painted in oils that couldn't exist. "Why is my mom's photo in your mansion?" she asked the silver-haired king in crimson velvet. And the ancient vampire's amber eyes went wide, not with an answer, but with the kind of shock that comes when your buried past walks through the door holding 6 homemade candles and an impossible question. Hello friends, welcome to our story. Before we begin, please like this video and subscribe. Also, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, we'd love to know. Ria's fingers ached from 3 days of dipping wicks into melted wax, but she didn't stop until all 6 candles stood perfect in her basket. Night-blooming jasmine, she'd crushed the petals herself, mixed them into the wax the way Mama had taught her before the fever came. Their single-room apartment smelled like flowers and desperation now, and Mama lay on the narrow bed with skin so hot it scared Ria to touch her. The medicine bottles on the nightstand were empty. The coin jar was empty. Everything was empty except the fear that lived in Ria's chest and these 6 candles that had to be enough. The whispers in the market said a reclusive nobleman lived alone on Thornwood Hill, that candles flickered in his windows, but no one ever visited, that strange things happened to people who knocked on his door after sunset. Ria was 6 years old, and she knocked anyway. Thornvale Mansion rose from the fog like something from Mama's old storybooks, all Gothic arches and stained glass windows depicting crimson roses in full bloom. Wrought iron gates twisted into thorned vines, and the stone walls seemed to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. Ria's hand trembled as she reached for the iron bell pull, but she thought of Mama's labored breathing and pulled hard. The sound echoed through the fog. Then silence. Then footsteps. When the gates opened, Ria expected a servant. Instead, she found herself staring up at a man so impossibly beautiful he couldn't be human. Silver-white hair pulled half back from sharp, elegant features. Amber eyes that held something ancient and sad. A burgundy velvet coat embroidered with silver thread that caught the candlelight from inside. He was tall enough that Ria had to crane her neck, pale enough that he seemed carved from moonlight itself. "Please, sir," Ria's voice came out smaller than she'd practiced. "My mom is sick and I made candles to sell, and everyone says you live alone, so maybe you need candles, and I'll give you a good price, I promise. They're really good candles." "Show me." His voice was smooth as winter wind, and when he crouched to her level, Ria saw his eyes weren't just amber, they held flecks of gold and hints of crimson, like embers barely contained. She lifted her basket with both hands. He took one candle, brought it close to his face, and inhaled deeply. For a long moment he said nothing, just held the candle as if it were something precious and fragile. "Night-blooming jasmine," he finally whispered. "You've captured it perfectly." His gaze shifted to her face with an intensity that made Ria feel seen in a way that was both terrifying and oddly safe. "How old are you, little candle maker?" 6. Almost 7. Something flickered across his features, surprise, or recognition, or pain. "And you came here alone?" "Mama can't walk anymore. The fever's too bad." Ria's throat tightened. "Please, I need to buy medicine." The man stood abruptly, opened the gates wide. "I'll buy all 6. And you'll come inside for warm food before you walk home in the cold." "I insist." "Strangers say not to go inside strange houses." "Wise strangers." "I am King Lucien Thornvale, and I give you my word you'll come to no harm in my home." He extended one pale hand. "Do we have an accord, candlemaker?" Ria looked at his hand, at the mansion behind him, at the basket of candles that had to save Mama's life. She took his hand. His skin was cold, but his grip was gentle. The foyer blazed with candlelight, hundreds of them on wrought iron candelabras, in crystal holders on every surface, reflected infinitely in mirrors framed with silver roses. The warmth hit Ria like an embrace after the November cold. Lucien led her deeper into the entrance hall, past furniture that looked older than the city itself, beneath a chandelier dripping with crystals that cast rainbow shadows across marble floors. And then Rhea saw the portrait. It hung above the fireplace mantel in a massive gilded frame, a woman with dark hair like Rhea's own, wearing a crimson gown Rhea had never seen, smiling with warmth that made the painted candlelight around her seem to flicker with life. The brushstrokes captured every detail, the curve of her cheek, the light in her eyes, the silver locket at her throat. Rhea's basket slipped from her hands. Candles rolled across the marble. "Why is my mom's photo in your mansion?" The words came out barely above a whisper, but they shattered the silence like breaking glass. Lucien froze mid-step. His entire body went rigid. When he turned to look at the portrait, then back at Rhea, his amber eyes were wide with something that looked like hope and horror tangled together. "That portrait." His voice cracked on the words. "I commissioned it 12 years ago." 3 days later, Lillian vanished without a trace. The candles on the mantel flickered. Somewhere in the mansion's depths, a clock began to chime. And from the shadows near the doorway, a man in a steward's dark uniform stepped forward, his expression grave. "My lord," the steward said quietly, staring at something behind Rhea, at her shadow stretching across the marble floor. "There are bite marks on her shadow. Fresh ones. Someone's been watching this child with surveillance magic." Lucien's amber eyes flashed crimson. "Silas, seal the mansion. No one enters or leaves without my word." He looked down at Rhea, and his voice gentled despite the sudden tension in his shoulders. "Tell me, little one, does your mother remember me?" Rhea shook her head slowly. "Mama doesn't remember anything from before I was born. She says the memories just aren't there." The clock finished chiming. In the terrible silence that followed, Lucien stared at the portrait of the woman who'd vanished, then at the 6-year-old girl with her face. And Rhea watched an ancient vampire realize that the past he'd mourned for 12 years had just walked through his door asking why her mother's portrait hung in his home. Lucien led Rhea to a sitting room where a fire crackled in a marble hearth, but he didn't sit. He stood before the flames, silver-white hair catching the light, and when he finally spoke his voice carried the weight of 12 years' worth of grief. "Your mother came to this mansion selling candles, just as you did. She was 23, and her work was extraordinary. She understood scent and memory in ways I'd never encountered in 4 centuries of existence." His amber eyes fixed on the dancing flames. "I bought every candle she made. Then I commissioned more. I told myself it was patronage, that I simply appreciated fine craftsmanship." "But it wasn't just the candles," Rhea said softly. "No." The word came out rough. "It wasn't. I invited her to see my conservatory. I'd collected night-blooming flowers from across the world. She walked among them like she belonged there, touching petals, inhaling fragrances, telling me stories about her grandmother who'd taught her the craft. We talked until sunrise. I hadn't talked to anyone like that in decades." Silas appeared with tea and warm bread, setting them beside Rhea before retreating to his post by the door. Rhea wrapped her cold hands around the teacup, but didn't drink, too caught up in watching emotions flicker across Lucien's ageless face. She came back the next week. And the week after. Always to deliver candles, always staying longer. He turned from the fire to face Rhea fully. "I showed her parts of this mansion no one had seen in a century. She told me about her dreams of opening a proper shop, of teaching the craft. We met in secret, my kind and hers don't often mix peacefully. But in the candlelit conservatory, those divisions felt meaningless." "You loved her," Rhea whispered. "I loved her," Lucien confirmed, and the admission seemed to cost him something. "After 3 months, I commissioned that portrait as a betrothal gift. I planned to propose beneath the wisteria arbor where we'd shared our first kiss. I had a locket made silver, engraved with a crescent moon and a thornless rose. Our symbols." Rhea's breath caught. "Mama has a locket like that. She clutches it when the fever's bad, but she says she doesn't know where it came from. She just woke up with it one day 6 years ago. Lucian's hands clenched at his sides. The night before I planned to propose, Lillian came to me terrified. She said someone had been following her, that she'd seen shadows move wrong, that whispers followed her through the market. I promised to protect her. I told her to stay in the mansion that night where she'd be safe. His voice cracked. She refused. Said she had preparations to make, that she'd return at sunset the next day. By dawn, she was gone. Gone how? Vanished. Her apartment emptied overnight, furniture, belongings, every trace. Her workshop abandoned, door hanging open, half-finished candles still cooling on the tables. I searched for weeks. Months. I used every resource, called in every favor. He pressed his palms against his eyes as if he could push back the memory. The Shadow Court's Elder Council summoned me. Elder Vesper himself told me to cease the search, that humans come and go, that attachment to mortals brings only pain. He said she'd clearly wanted to leave. That I should forget. But you didn't forget. I couldn't. Lucian gestured toward the portrait in the other room. I kept the betrothal gift. Hung it where I'd see it every day. A reminder that love and loss are two sides of the same coin. Rhea set down her teacup with trembling hands. Mama doesn't remember any of that. She only remembers the last 6 years, waking up in a different apartment with me as a baby, no memory of being pregnant, no memory of you or this place or anything before. The doctors say it's trauma-induced amnesia, but she's been sick ever since, like something's eating her from the inside. The fire crackled loudly in the sudden silence. Lucian's amber eyes flashed crimson for just a moment. 6 years. You're almost 7. Which means... A raven's harsh cry cut through the air. All 3 of them turned as a massive black bird landed on the windowsill, something clutched in its talons. Silas moved immediately, opening the window with practiced wariness. The raven dropped a rolled parchment sealed with red wax and departed without a sound. Silas brought the letter to Lucian, his expression grim. Blood sealed, my lord. Shadow Court mark. Lucian broke the seal with one sharp movement. As he read, the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. His hands began to shake not with fear, but with barely contained rage. What does it say? Rhea asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Lucian read aloud, his voice cold as winter steel. The scent returns. The bloodline stirs. Present the child bearing Lillian's face to the Shadow Court. 3 nights hence. Noncompliance is treason. Elder Vesper sends his regards. Rhea's heart hammered against her ribs. What does that mean? It means, Lucian said slowly, kneeling before her so they were eye to eye, that someone very powerful has been watching you. Tracking you. And now they want you brought before the council that rules my kind. His amber eyes searched her face, seeing Lillian's features reflected back at him, seeing the impossible made flesh. Tell me true. Does your mother have the locket still? She never takes it off. Then she's been carrying my betrothal gift for 6 years without knowing what it means. He took Rhea's small hands in his cold ones. I failed to protect Lillian 12 years ago. I won't fail to protect you now. But I need to understand, your mother doesn't remember being pregnant. No. She says one day she just was. With me already born. The memories before that are just gone. Lucian stood abruptly, began pacing like a caged predator. Silas, how long would it take to strip someone's memories? To make them forget an entire pregnancy, a love affair, their whole life before a certain point. Blood magic, my lord. Very old. Very illegal. And it would require... Silas's face went pale. It would require council-level power. The Raven's message suddenly made terrible sense. Rhea watched understanding crystallize across Lucian's features, not just grief now, but fury. They didn't just take her from me, he whispered. They took her from herself. Outside, the November wind picked up, howling around the mansion's Gothic towers. The candles throughout the room flickered in unison, and Rhea shivered despite the fire's warmth. 3 nights. The Shadow Court wanted her in 3 nights. And somewhere in their small apartment across the city, Mama lay burning with fever, clutching a locket whose meaning had been stolen along with everything else. The mansion's archive stretched 3 stories high, shelves carved from ancient wood groaning under the weight of centuries. Candles floated in the air without holders, casting pools of golden light across leather-bound volumes and scrolls yellowed with age. Rhea followed Lucien down the narrow aisles, past books written in languages she didn't recognize, past maps of places that might not exist anymore. "Everything leaves a trace," Lucien said, pulling down ledgers marked with dates from 12 years ago. Receipts, correspondence, records. If the council moved against Lillian, there will be evidence. Silas brought armfuls of documents to the central table, transaction records showing payments to Lillian for candle work, letters discussing commission pieces, visitor logs from the mansion gates. Rhea watched Lucien's pale fingers trace the dates, watched his expression tighten with each reminder of what he'd lost. Then he found the letter. Unsealed, unsent, the paper still crisp despite 12 years in storage. His handwriting covered the page in elegant script, and when he read aloud his voice dropped to barely a whisper. "My dearest Lillian, words feel insufficient for what you've awakened in me. For centuries I've walked in darkness, and you brought light I'd forgotten existed. Tomorrow I'll ask you properly, but tonight I write this so you'll always know my heart, unchanging as stone until you touched it, now beats only for you. Whatever answer you give, whatever future we build or don't build, thank you for teaching an ancient creature how to hope again." Signed, sealed, never delivered. Rhea's throat ached. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out the silver locket she'd brought from home, the one Mama clutched during nightmares, the one she never explained. "Mama wears this. I thought, maybe you should see it." Lucien took the locket with trembling hands. His thumb found the engraved crescent moon and thornless rose immediately, traced them like muscle memory. He pressed the clasp, and it opened to reveal a portrait miniature no bigger than a coin. Lucien's face, those amber eyes somehow alive even in paint, and a pressed flower, its petals still holding faint color. "Thornless rose," he breathed. "From the conservatory. From the night I..." He couldn't finish. The locket snapped shut in his fist. Silas appeared from deeper in the archive, moving with unusual urgency. He carried a book bound in midnight blue leather, its cover marked with silver constellations. "My lord, the Codex of Twilight. I cross-referenced with your bloodline," and he set the book down with shaking hands. "You need to see this." The pages fell open to an illuminated prophecy written in gold ink. Rhea couldn't read most of the ancient script, but Lucien could. His face went white as he read, then whiter still. "When darkness learns to love the light," he read aloud, "a child shall walk between the two, the moon-born daughter. She shall bear 3 marks. Light she brings reveals truth. Glamour of ancients shall not bind her. Shields of crystal moon shall rise to her defense. In her awakening, the gentle darkness comes, when fangs need not fear the twilight." "What does that mean?" Rhea asked, though something in her chest already knew, had always known. "It means there's a prophecy about a child born of vampire and human." Lucien looked at her with something like wonder and terror. "A child who can exist in both worlds, who cannot be controlled by our magic, who will change everything." Silas cleared his throat. "My lord, if I may, there's a blood recognition test. If she's truly of your line, do it." Lucien produced a small silver needle from a drawer, pricked his finger without ceremony. A single drop of blood welled up, dark as garnets. He held out his hand to Rhea. "May I?" She nodded, throat too tight for words. The needle was cold, the prick sharp but brief. Lucien pressed his bleeding finger to her palm, mixing their blood where it pooled. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Rhea's palm began to glow. The blood didn't just mix, it ignited with silver-white light. The glow spread across her skin, tracing patterns like frost on winter windows, and when it faded a mark remained, A perfect crescent moon scar, luminous and permanent. The first mark, Silas whispered. Blood recognition. She's yours, my lord. Lucian staggered back, pressed his hand over his mouth. Through his fingers, Rhea heard something that might have been a sob or a laugh or both. Lillian was pregnant. When they took her, she was carrying, he couldn't finish. The moonborn, Silas completed grimly. And if Vesper suspected, a candle on the far side of the room suddenly burned brighter. Rhea turned toward it, confused, and the flame responded, growing taller, shifting from yellow to white. She held up her glowing palm, and every candle in the archive blazed in unison, their light suddenly revealing something that shouldn't be there. In the corner, half hidden by shadow, stood a figure in a hooded cloak. The intense candlelight stripped away whatever magic had kept them hidden. They wore the Shadow Court's crimson sigil on their chest. Spy. Silas moved with inhuman speed, but the figure dissolved into smoke, escaping through a ventilation grate. Light she brings reveals truth, Lucian quoted, staring at Rhea's glowing palm. The second mark just manifested. There's a third mark, Rhea said, looking between him and the prophecy. About glamours? Silas nodded slowly, met Lucian's eyes. My lord, with your permission? Test it. The steward turned to Rhea, and his eyes flashed with that same crimson Rhea had glimpsed in Lucian's. When he spoke, his voice carried weight that pressed against her skull. Kneel before me, child. The command was absolute, meant to be obeyed without question. Rhea felt it wash over her like water over stone, present, noticed, but unable to take root. She remained standing, tilted her head curiously. Why would I kneel? Silas's eyes returned to normal. She's immune. Full immunity to compulsion. The third mark, glamour of ancients, shall not bind her. Lucian sank into a chair, staring at Rhea as if seeing her for the first time. The crescent moon on her palm still glowed faintly. The candles still responded to her presence, flickering in rhythm with her breathing. They knew, he said finally. 12 years ago, Vesper and the council knew or suspected Lillian carried the moonborn. That's why they took her. Why they stripped her memories and imprisoned her in poverty. They were waiting. Waiting for what? For you to manifest, Silas answered quietly. For the prophecy to begin fulfilling itself. And now that it has, now that your power is awakening. The raven's message on the table seemed to burn without flame. 3 nights. Present the child. They want to kill me, Rhea said. It wasn't a question. Lucian's amber eyes flashed crimson and stayed that way. They'd have to go through me first. And I've had 12 years to perfect my rage. The spy didn't dissolve completely into smoke. Silas caught them mid-transformation, dragged them back into solid form with magic that made the air crackle. When the hood fell away, Rhea saw a young vampire with terrified green eyes, and the Shadow Court's sigil burned into her wrist like a brand. Please, the spy gasped as Silas forced her into a chair. I'm just a messenger, I don't know anything. You were glamored into my private archive, Lucian said coldly, crimson still bleeding through his amber eyes. You know enough. Talk, or I'll have Silas extract every memory you possess, and trust me, that process isn't gentle. The spy's resistance crumbled. Words tumbled out in a desperate rush. Elder Vesper discovered the pregnancy 12 years ago. He has informants everywhere, even among humans. When he learned Lillian carried your child, he brought it before the full council. And? Lucian's voice could have frozen fire. The Codex of Twilight was consulted. The prophecy confirmed. A child of both bloods would fulfill the moonborn legend, immunity to compulsion, ability to reveal truth, power to change the fundamental rules of our existence. The spy's hands shook. The council saw it as an existential threat. If vampires could no longer compel obedience, if truth became impossible to hide, if the moonborn brought gentle darkness that let us exist in twilight, their power would evaporate, Silas finished grimly. Control built on fear and compulsion doesn't survive transparency. Vesper wanted Lillian killed immediately. But Mora, the court's blood mage, warned that killing the moonborn in the womb would trigger a magical cataclysm. The prophecy was already in motion. Trying to stop it would be like trying to stop dawn itself. Rhea found her voice. So they let me be born? The spy nodded miserably. Vesper's compromise. Kidnap Lillian at 6 months pregnant, isolate her, let the child be born, then strip Lillian's memories completely. Make her forget you, forget the pregnancy, forget everything. Curse her with illness that would slowly weaken her. Imprison both of you in poverty where the Moonborn's powers would hopefully never manifest. And if they did manifest? Lucian asked, though his expression said he already knew. Then collect both mother and child for proper disposal before the prophecy could complete itself. The spy's voice dropped to a whisper. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But those were our orders 12 years ago, and those are our orders now. Lucian's fist slammed into the table, splintering ancient wood. Mora helped them? The mage I trusted? Mora gave them what they wanted, the spy said quickly. But she also left a failsafe. She told me before sending me here, if Lillian ever saw your portrait again, the memory block would begin to crack. She couldn't stop the council, but she could plant seeds for truth. Where's Mora now? Still at court. Still serving Vesper. But my lord, the spy leaned forward urgently. There's more. Vesper sent agents to Lillian's apartment tonight. If the Moonborn has manifested, both are to be eliminated immediately. Not captured. Eliminated. The words hit Rhea like ice water. Mama. They're going to Mama right now. Lucian was already moving, shouting orders. Silas, send the night guard to the address Rhea gave us. Full force. Everyone you can spare. Go. But even as Silas ran, Rhea heard it, a raven's cry from outside, urgent and wrong. Then another. Then a dozen more, their calls building into a cacophony. Too late, the spy whispered. Those are the signal. The agents have already arrived. Rhea didn't think. She ran. Through the archive, down the corridors, her small legs carrying her as fast as they could toward the mansion's entrance. Behind her she heard Lucian calling her name, but she couldn't stop. Mama was alone, sick, defenseless. Mama who'd spent 6 years protecting Rhea from threats she couldn't remember, who'd worked until her hands bled to keep them fed, who'd never once complained about the life stolen from her. She burst into the entrance hall just as the front doors exploded inward. Lucian's night guard carried Lillian between them, unconscious, burning with fever worse than when Rhea had left her. Behind them, 3 figures in dark cloaks crashed through, moving with inhuman speed. One guard stayed to fight while the others rushed Lillian deeper into the mansion. Rhea watched vampire combat for the first time, movements too fast to track, strength that shattered marble, violence so casual it seemed choreographed. The guard fought like fury itself, but 3 against 1 wasn't fair even for immortals. Then Lucian arrived. He moved like storm wind, like vengeance given form. His hand closed around one attacker's throat and didn't stop until it crushed completely. The second he threw so hard they went through a stone column. The third tried to run, but Silas appeared from shadows and ended them efficiently. Silence fell, broken only by Lillian's labored breathing and Rhea's terrified sobs. Search them, Lucian commanded, still standing over the destroyed bodies. I want proof of who sent them. Silas found it immediately, blood-sealed orders bearing Vesper's personal sigil. He read aloud, execute Lillian. Capture the Moonborn for study, then disposal. Leave no witnesses. Make it look like human violence. They tried to poison her first, one of the guards reported, holding up candles still in their wrapping. Delivered to her apartment this afternoon. When that didn't work fast enough, they came in person. Rhea stared at the poison candles. They looked perfect, white wax, clean wicks, tied with pretty ribbons. But when she moved closer, her moonborn power responded. The candle's scent hit her like a slap. Beneath the pleasant fragrance lurked something rotten, something wrong. Her light-revealing truth made the poison visible as dark veins through the wax. "I would have known," she whispered. "If Mama had tried to light them, I would have smelled it wrong." "Which is exactly why Vesper sent agents when poison failed," Lucian said grimly. He turned to Silas. "Bring Lillian to the East Wing. Summon every healer we have. And send formal notice to the Shadow Court. Lillian and Rhea are under my personal protection. Anyone who touches them answers to me." "My lord, that's a direct challenge to the council." "I know what it is." Lucian's crimson eyes didn't fade. "Send it anyway." The response came before dawn. A blood-sealed proclamation delivered by 100 ravens at once, their cries waking the entire mansion. Vesper's words were read aloud in the courtyard where all could hear. "King Lucian Thornvale stands accused of harboring the Moonborn abomination in defiance of Shadow Court law. He will present himself and the child to mandatory council assembly in 2 nights' time. Refusal constitutes treason. The penalty for treason is death. Signed by unanimous council vote. 2 nights. Not 3 anymore. 2 nights until Rhea would have to stand before the vampires who'd destroyed her family once and wanted to finish the job." Upstairs, Mama lay unconscious, cursed and poisoned. And somewhere in the mansion's depths, the portrait of a woman who'd been erased from her own life hung in candlelight, waiting to remember. Lillian woke on the 3rd day, fever broken but spirit fractured. The healers had purged the poison and stabilized the curse, but they couldn't touch what had been done to her mind. She sat in the Eastern Wing's recovery room, wrapped in blankets despite the fire's warmth, staring at nothing with eyes that held 12 years of stolen time. Rhea led her through the mansion slowly, holding her hand like Mama had held hers through every childhood fear. When they reached the entrance hall, Lillian stopped before the portrait. Her free hand rose trembling toward the painted face, her own face, younger and unburdened, wearing a crimson gown she didn't remember owning. "I know this place," Lillian whispered. "I don't remember it, but I know it. Like a dream I can't quite catch." "Mama." Rhea's voice shook. "This is Lucian. He's my father." Lucian stood several paces back, giving them space, but at those words his carefully maintained composure cracked. Lillian turned to face him, really look at him, and something flickered behind her eyes. Recognition without memory, longing without context. "I painted your face," she said slowly. "In my apartment. 12 times. I kept destroying the canvases because I didn't know why I was painting a stranger." Her hand found the silver locket at her throat. "And this. I've clutched this through every nightmare, but I don't know who gave it to me." "I did." Lucian's voice was barely above a whisper. "The night before I planned to propose. You wore it when they took you." Lillian's breath hitched. Tears spilled down her cheeks, though she didn't seem to notice. "What did they take from me?" "Everything. But we're going to make them answer for it." Lucian gathered them in the archive that evening, surrounded by ancient law books and the Codex of Twilight still open to the Moonborn prophecy. Silas stood watch while Lucian explained what came next, not a plan, but a gamble with all their lives as stakes. "There's an ancient law older than the Shadow Court itself," he said, finger tracing text in a volume bound with iron. "The right of unveiled truth. It hasn't been invoked in 3 centuries, but it's never been formally abolished. Under the right, lies become visible as writhing shadows. Truth glows like candlelight. No one can hide behind deception." "And they'll agree to this?" Lillian asked, still weak but growing sharper with each hour of clarity. "They can't refuse. Once invoked before the full court, refusal is admission of guilt." Lucian's amber eyes met Rhea's. "But it's dangerous. Vesper will try to twist truth, to make your existence itself the crime. We'll need allies." Over the next 2 days, Lucian's network came alive. Younger vampires who'd grown tired of the council's iron control arrived quietly after dark. Minor nobles who'd seen Vesper's cruelty firsthand pledged support. And then, on the evening before the assembly, a blood-sealed letter arrived bearing Moira's mark. I cannot openly defy them, she'd written. But I will be there. And I will speak truth when the right compels it. I'm sorry I couldn't protect her 12 years ago. Let me help protect her daughter now. Rhea found Lucian standing before Lillian's portrait that night, the eve of the assembly that would decide everything. She slipped her small hand into his cold one. What if they decide to kill me anyway? She asked quietly. What if truth isn't enough? Lucian knelt to her level, and his crimson-tinged eyes held absolute conviction. Then I will burn this kingdom to ash before I let them touch you. For 100 years I've ruled by their laws, played their games, maintained their precious order. But you're my daughter. And there is no law, no council, no ancient power that stands between a father and his child. Not while I'm still breathing. Even if it means war? Especially if it means war. The attack came an hour before dawn. Rhea woke to shattering glass and Silas's urgent shouts. An assassin had breached the eastern wing, Vesper's final attempt to eliminate the problem before the right could expose him. The figure moved like smoke, curved blade of cursed silver gleaming, aimed directly at Rhea's heart. She didn't think. Didn't plan. Just threw up her hands and screamed. The third mark answered. Crystalline barriers erupted from nothing, walls of solidified moonlight that caught the silver blade mid-strike and shattered it like ice. The barriers spread, forming a perfect dome around Rhea, and through their translucent surface, she watched the assassin dissolve under their touch. Throughout the mansion, every candle ignited simultaneously, turning night to blazing day. When Lucian crashed through the door moments later, he found Rhea standing in a sphere of glowing crystal, surrounded by light so bright it hurt to look at. The third mark of the prophecy, shields of crystal moon that rose to her defense, manifested in full. The moonborn awakens, Silas breathed from the doorway. The barriers faded slowly, melting back into nothing. Rhea stood trembling, staring at her hands which still glowed with silver-white light. Lucian pulled her into his arms, and she felt his whole body shaking. No more waiting, he said against her hair. No more defense. Tonight we end this. Morning brought formal preparation. Seamstresses worked through the day on Rhea's presentation attire, deep blue velvet the color of twilight, embroidered with silver thread depicting crescent moons and thornless roses intertwined. The symbols of both her parents, combined in a pattern that spoke of unity rather than division. When Rhea stood before the mirror in her new dress, she barely recognized herself. She looked like she belonged in this Gothic mansion, like she could stand before ancient vampires without flinching. Lucian appeared in the doorway, dressed in formal black and crimson, the crown of the Vampire King, something he rarely wore, settled on his silver-white hair. Are you ready? He asked. No, Rhea admitted. But I'm going anyway. Good. He offered his hand. If you're to be presented before the Shadow Court, you'll be presented as exactly what you are, my daughter, the Moonborn and the future of this kingdom. Let them look at you and understand what they tried to destroy. Let them see what love looks like when it refuses to die. Lillian joined them in the entrance hall, still weak but standing tall in a gown of deep crimson, the same shade as the one in her portrait. Around her neck, Lucian's silver locket caught the candlelight. I don't remember loving you, she told him quietly. But I'm starting to remember what they took from me. And I'll stand beside you when we make them answer for it. The three of them walked through the mansion's front doors together as sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. Ahead, the Shadow Court's assembly hall waited, a massive Gothic structure where centuries of vampire law had been written in blood and fear. Tonight, Rhea thought, feeling the crescent moon mark burn on her palm, we write something different. Tonight we write truth. The Shadow Court's assembly hall rose from bedrock like a cathedral built by creatures who'd forgotten God. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into darkness above, and stained glass windows depicted scenes of ancient vampire conquest in shades of crimson and black. Blood-red candles burned in iron sconces along walls carved with names of elders long turned to dust. Cold moonlight filtered through the glass, painting everything in hues of violence and night. Hundreds of vampires filled the tiered seating, ancient beings who'd watched empires rise and fall, whose combined age numbered in the tens of thousands of years. They wore their power like second skins, elegant suits and gowns that cost more than Ria's entire apartment building, jewelry that had belonged to dead kings, expressions of carefully cultivated boredom that masked razor-sharp political calculation. Ria walked down the central aisle holding Lucien's hand, and the weight of their collective gaze pressed against her like physical force. Her blue velvet dress suddenly felt like costume, her embroidered moons and roses like childish decoration. She was 6 years old walking into a room full of predators who'd already tried to kill her twice. At the hall's head, elevated on a dais of black marble, sat the Shadow Court's inner council. 7 elders in high-backed chairs that might as well have been thrones. And in the center, presiding over them all, Elder Vesper. He was beautiful the way winter was beautiful, all sharp edges and killing cold. Silver hair fell past his shoulders, and ice-blue eyes held no warmth, no mercy, nothing human or humane. He wore black robes trimmed with silver thread, and when he stood to address the assembly, every vampire in the room fell silent. "We convene to address the matter of the abomination," Vesper's voice carried without effort, cold and clear as breaking glass. "King Lucien Thornvale has harbored a creature that threatens the foundations of our society, a half-breed child whose very existence mocks the purity of our bloodlines. The law is clear. Surrender the child for examination and disposal, or I invoke the right of unveiled truth." Lucien's voice cut through Vesper's like a blade through silk. He stepped forward, pulling Ria with him into the hall's center where moonlight and candlelight converged. "Under ancient law that supersedes this council's authority, I invoke the right. I present my daughter, Ria Thornvale, and I demand justice for crimes committed against my bloodline." The room exploded in whispers, shock, outrage, fascination rippling through the assembled nobles. Several council members shot to their feet, but Vesper raised one pale hand for silence. "The right has not been invoked in 3 centuries. Because those who rule through lies prefer not to face truth," Lucien interrupted. "Do you refuse? Before all assembled here, do you refuse the right?" Vesper's jaw clenched. Refusing would be admission of guilt, proof he had something to hide. The political calculation played across his features before he smoothed them back into cold neutrality. "The right is acknowledged. Let truth be revealed." The magical binding settled over the hall like falling snow, invisible but undeniable. Ria felt it in her bones, a pressure that made breathing difficult. Around the room, candles flickered in unison, and the moonlight through stained glass seemed to brighten. Under the right's power, lies would appear as writhing shadows. Truth would glow like living flame. "My daughter stands accused," Lucien said, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast space. "But before she answers to you, you will answer to me. Elder Vesper, under the binding of the right, did you order Lillian's kidnapping 12 years ago?" The woman left of her own accord, Vesper began, but shadows erupted around him like smoke. They writhed and twisted, making his form indistinct, turning his words into visible lies. Several vampires gasped. The right was working. "Answer plainly," Lucien pressed. "Yes or no? Did you order her taken?" Vesper's ice-blue eyes blazed with fury, but under the right's binding he couldn't maintain the deception. The woman carried a child that threatened our entire way of life. Actions were taken for the good of. Yes or no? The shadows thickened around Vesper until he could barely be seen through them. When he finally spoke, the word came out like poison. Yes. A collective intake of breath swept the assembly. Before Vesper could spin the admission, movement came from the council's edge. A woman in deep purple robes stood, older than most present, with silver-streaked dark hair and eyes that had seen too much. Mora, the blood mage. "I performed the memory-stripping curse," she said, and her words glowed. Soft golden light surrounded her, the right marking truth as clearly as it had marked Vesper's lies. Elder Vesper brought Lillian to my workshop 6 months into her pregnancy. He ordered me to wait until the child was born, then strip every memory from before conception. Make her forget King Lucian, forget the pregnancy, forget herself. I was told the moonborn prophecy made the child too dangerous to kill, but too dangerous to let develop with knowledge of her heritage. The glow around Moira intensified as she continued. I was also ordered to curse Lillian with progressive weakness, a slow death that would ensure both mother and child lived in poverty, powerless, until the moonborn's abilities manifested. At which point, she met Ria's eyes across the hall. Both were to be collected and eliminated. Lies. Vesper snarled, but shadows consumed him entirely now, his form barely visible. I have proof. Moira produced a blood-sealed scroll from her robes. Orders written in your hand, Elder Vesper. Signed with your personal seal. I kept them as insurance for 12 years, waiting for this moment. Silas stepped forward to take the scroll, held it up to the moonlight streaming through stained glass. The assembly could see Vesper's handwriting, his seal, his explicit orders to kidnap, curse, and eventually kill both Lillian and her unborn child. More vampires stood then. A young noble with defiant eyes. I saw them bring a pregnant human woman to the lower chambers 12 years ago. I was told to forget what I'd witnessed, and when I tried to speak truth, I was compelled to silence. His words glowed golden. The rite confirmed him. An older vampire, one of the minor council members, I voted against Vesper's plan. I was overruled and threatened with exile if I spoke. Golden light surrounded her testimony. Another, then another. 12 years of suppressed truth came flooding out, each witness glowing with the rite's confirmation. The case Vesper had built on lies and compulsion crumbled beneath the weight of illuminated truth. Enough. Vesper's shout shook the rafters. Shadows exploded outward from him in waves. You fools don't understand. The moonborn brings twilight, makes us vulnerable to light, strips our compulsion, reveals every secret we've buried. She'll destroy the power structures that have kept us safe for millennia. Safe? Lillian's voice rang out from where she stood at the hall's edge. She stepped forward, and though she was human and weak among immortal predators, she moved with the dignity of someone who'd survived having her entire life stolen. You call ruling through fear and compulsion safety? You took 12 years from me. 12 years of memories, of my daughter's childhood, of the man I loved. You cursed me to die slowly while my child grew up in poverty, and you call that safety. The rite's light surrounded her completely. Every word blazed with truth. Look at her, Lillian continued, gesturing to Ria. She's 6 years old. She makes candles and takes care of her sick mother, and she walked into a vampire's mansion alone because she was desperate enough to face her fears. What threat does she pose except your ability to rule through darkness and lies? Vesper's composure finally shattered. His eyes flashed crimson, and he raised both hands. You want truth? Here's truth. I will not let a half-breed abomination destroy everything we've built. He threw his hands forward, and compulsion erupted like a tsunami. Mass compulsion, illegal, unethical, powerful enough to strip free will from dozens of vampires simultaneously. The command was simple and absolute. Seize the child. Kill her now. Ria felt the compulsion crash against her mind like a wave against stone. The pressure was immense, centuries of Vesper's accumulated power focused on breaking her will. Around the hall, vampires began to move toward her mechanically, expressions blank, bodies no longer their own. But the third mark had already manifested. Glamour of ancients would not bind her. The crescent moon on Ria's palm erupted with silver-white light. She didn't know what she was doing, didn't understand the power that rose through her like tides responding to the moon itself. She just knew that Vesper's compulsion felt wrong, felt like chains made of shadow, felt like everything that had hurt Mama and stolen their lives. So she broke it. Light exploded from her mark, radiating outward in waves that washed over every vampire Vesper had compelled. The shadow chains of his compulsion shattered like glass. Dozens of vampires staggered as their minds became their own again, gasping as if surfacing from drowning. The assembly hall erupted into chaos. Some vampires moved toward Vesper in fury, freed from compulsions that had held them for years. Others rushed to Rhea's defense. Still others simply stood frozen, watching the foundations of their political world crack and crumble. And at the center of it all stood a 6-year-old girl in blue velvet, palm glowing with moonlight, surrounded by candles that had ignited themselves in response to her power. Proof made flesh that the prophecy was real and the age of ruling through darkness had just ended. In the chaos of shattered compulsion and rising fury, Lillian collapsed. She went down like a puppet with cut strings, and Lucien caught her before she hit the marble floor. Rhea rushed to them, her moonborn power still blazing from breaking Vesper's mass compulsion, her small hands reaching for Mama who'd gone pale as death itself. The curse, Moira called out, pushing through the crowd. The memory block, it's destabilizing. Your power combined with her proximity to Lucien, it's too much strain. Fix it. Lucien's voice cracked with desperation as he cradled Lillian against his chest. You put the curse on her, take it off. I can't, not safely, not here, but Moira stopped mid-sentence, staring at Rhea whose crescent mark had begun to glow brighter, pulsing in rhythm with Lillian's labored breathing. Unless, the moonborn herself. Rhea didn't wait for explanation. She grabbed Mama's hand, the one that clutched the silver locket even in unconsciousness, and her power responded. Not with the defensive fury that had shattered Vesper's compulsion, but with something gentler, moonlight rather than lightning, tide rather than tsunami. The curse resisted. 12 years of blood magic woven by one of the most powerful mages in vampire history, designed to be permanent, unbreakable. But Rhea's power wasn't trying to break it. It was simply illuminating truth, revealing what had been hidden, and truth was the one thing no curse could ultimately withstand. The memory block didn't crack. It shattered. Lillian's eyes flew open, but she wasn't seeing the assembly hall. She was seeing everything, 12 years of stolen life flooding back in a cascade of images and emotions that hit like physical blows. Rhea felt it through their joined hands, the love first, achingly beautiful. Lucien in the conservatory surrounded by night-blooming flowers, his laugh when Lillian made a joke about vampires having terrible taste in interior design. Their first kiss under the wisteria arbor. The night he gave her the locket when he'd trembled like a nervous boy despite 4 centuries of life. Then the joy discovering the pregnancy, her hands on her swelling belly, Lucien's face when she told him, the way he'd talked to their unborn daughter through her skin, promising protection and love and a future where she'd never be afraid. Then terror, the shadows that followed her, the sense of being watched, running to Lucien, but refusing to stay because she had preparations, because she couldn't believe anyone would really hurt her. Because she didn't understand yet what prophecy meant to creatures who'd lived through the rise and fall of civilizations. The kidnapping came next, hooded figures in her workshop after midnight, hands over her mouth, Vesper's ice blue eyes the last thing she saw before darkness. The council chamber where they debated her fate while she was chained and 6 months pregnant, arguing whether to kill her immediately or wait for the child's birth. Moira's face, sorrowful but compliant, explaining what would be done. The memory-stripping ritual, not quick, not merciful, feeling her own mind being hollowed out like scooping out the inside of a pumpkin while leaving the shell intact. The cursed pregnancy, laboring alone in a bare room with only strangers attending, giving birth to a daughter she'd already been made to forget carrying. Waking up in a different apartment with a 6-year-old sleeping beside her and fragments of false memories that didn't quite fit, struggling to understand why her body ached and her mind had holes, and why she clutched a silver locket she couldn't remember receiving. 6 years of watching those holes, living around them like avoiding the gap where a tooth had been pulled, raising Rhea in poverty while sickness ate away at her from the inside, always feeling like something crucial was missing, but never knowing what. The memories crashed through her like a flood through a broken dam, and when they finally settled, when Lillian could see the assembly hall again, the first word from her lips was his name. Lucian. Her voice broke on it. They stole us. They stole everything. He held her like he'd never let go again, his face buried in her hair, and Rhea saw tears streak down the vampire king's ageless face. Around them, the assembly had gone completely silent, vampires frozen as they watched 12 years of injustice made visible through the right's unforgiving light. Lillian pushed herself upright on shaking legs. Lucian tried to support her, but she shook her head. This, she needed to do standing on her own. I am Lillian. Her voice rang through the vast hall, and the right's golden light surrounded her like a corona. I am human. I am mortal. I loved a vampire and bore his child. For this crime of love, I lost 12 years of my life. She turned slowly, meeting the eyes of ancient beings who'd watched her kidnapping, her curse, her erasure, and said nothing. I don't remember my daughter's first word. Her first steps. The first time she made a candle all by herself. I don't remember being pregnant with her, feeling her kick, talking to her before she was born. I don't remember the man I loved or the life we might have built together. All of that was carved out of my mind like cutting away rot, except what was removed wasn't rot, it was love. It was joy. It was everything that made my life worth living. The light around her intensified, forcing some vampires to shade their eyes. My daughter grew up in a single room with bare walls and empty cupboards. She learned to make candles at 5 years old so we could eat. She walked to a vampire's mansion alone because she was desperate enough to face her fears for medicine I couldn't afford. All of this because you feared a prophecy. Because a child being born who could reveal truth threatened your power. Lillian's gaze found Vesper, who stood rigid on his dais, shadows still writhing around him like smoke. Look at her, Lillian commanded, and every vampire in the hall turned to stare at Rhea. 6 years old. She makes candles. She loves her mother. She walked into darkness with courage most adults couldn't muster. What threat does this child pose? What danger is she to you? Silence. No one answered. The right made lying impossible, and the truth was too damning to speak aloud. You're not afraid of her power, Lillian said, her words glowing so brightly now they were almost hard to look at. You're afraid that your authority, built on fear and compulsion and darkness, can be replaced with something better. You're afraid that if she brings gentle darkness, if vampires no longer need to hide and hunt and rule through terror, you'll lose control. And you'd rather kill a 6-year-old child than risk losing your grip on power. The truth of it hung in the air like ringing bells. Several council members looked away. Others stared at their hands. The younger vampires who'd been freed from Vesper's compulsion watched with expressions that mixed fury and hope in equal measure. Vesper finally moved, stepping forward with desperate energy. You don't understand. His voice cracked. The moonborn brings twilight, the prophecy is clear. When fangs need not fear the twilight, we become vulnerable. Everything we are, everything that makes us powerful, gets stripped away. The prophecy says gentle darkness. Rhea's small voice cut through Vesper's panic. She stepped forward, her crescent mark still glowing, candles throughout the hall responding to her presence by burning brighter. Not weakness. Not vulnerability. Gentle darkness. She looked up at the assembled vampires, hundreds of ancient predators who'd ruled through fear so long they'd forgotten any other way. You spent so long being afraid of light that you forgot what happens between day and night. Twilight. The hour when the world isn't light or dark but both. When you don't have to choose between power and truth. Her voice was steady despite being the youngest creature in the room by centuries. You forgot what it's like to not rule by fear. So you made everyone else afraid instead. The right's light surrounded her fully now, golden and silver combined, making her seem less like a 6-year-old child and more like prophecy made flesh. Maybe, Rhea said quietly, the prophecy isn't about making you weak. Maybe it's about making you free. The assembly hall held its breath. In the terrible, beautiful silence that followed, lit by candles that burned with impossible brightness and moonlight that seemed warmer than it had any right to be, the foundations of an empire built on darkness began to transform into something that might, given time and courage, become light. Vesper moved with the speed of true desperation. One moment he stood on the dais, exposed and cornered, shadows writhing around him like dying things. The next, his hand emerged from his robes clutching a blade of cursed silver, the kind forged specifically to kill Moo-born, though none had existed to test it on for centuries. The metal gleamed with sickly light, and when he lunged toward Rhea, every vampire in the hall understood this was his final move. Lucien threw himself between them, faster than thought, but Vesper was ancient and desperate and had nothing left to lose. The blade arced toward Rhea's heart with terrible precision. The Moo-born power didn't ask permission. It erupted. Crystalline barriers exploded from nothing, walls of solidified moonlight that caught the cursed blade mid-strike. The silver shattered against them like ice against stone, fragments scattering across marble in a rain of broken metal. But the barriers didn't stop. They spread outward in waves, forming a perfect dome around Rhea that pulsed with light so pure it seemed to sing. Every candle in the assembly hall responded. Hundreds of flames surged higher, brighter, no longer simple fire but living light that moved with conscious intent. They burned with Rhea's will, and what they illuminated made the entire assembly gasp. Vesper's centuries of manipulation became visible as shadow chains, thousands of them, stretching from his hands to vampires throughout the hall, binding them with compulsions layered over decades. The rite had shown individual lies, but Rhea's fully awakened power revealed everything at once. The complete web of control he'd woven, every forced loyalty and stolen choice made manifest. The Lightbringer had fully realized. Rhea's flames didn't just illuminate the shadow chains. They burned them. One by one the bindings disintegrated under her candlelight, and with each broken chain a vampire staggered as their mind became truly their own, some for the first time in a century. The liberation spread like wildfire through the assembly, and Vesper's scream when his power base disintegrated was the sound of an empire collapsing in real time. Lucien moved while Vesper was distracted by his unraveling control. He crossed the space between them with predatory grace, caught Vesper's wrist, and twisted until the elder vampire dropped to his knees. The remains of the cursed blade clattered away across marble. Ancient law was clear: an attempt on royal blood, especially a child's, carried only one sentence. Lucien could execute him. Should execute him. Every vampire present knew it. His hand moved to the ceremonial blade at his belt, and Vesper's ice-blue eyes finally showed fear. "Papa, don't." The words stopped Lucien cold. Not King Lucien, or my lord, or even just his name. Papa. The first time Rhea had called him that, and it cut through his rage like moonlight through darkness. He looked back at his daughter, still surrounded by her crystalline dome, glowing with power that had rewritten the rules of their world. 6 years old. Making candles. Loving her mother. And even now, even after everything Vesper had done, choosing mercy. Lucien's hand fell away from his blade. He stood, dragging Vesper up with him, and addressed the assembly with a voice that carried the weight of 4 centuries. "You showed me what happens when power answers to nothing but itself. When rulers become so afraid of losing control that they'd rather destroy than adapt." He met Vesper's eyes. "Monsters are made by choices. I choose differently." To the council, to every vampire watching, Elder Vesper is stripped of all titles and authority. His ability to compel others is bound effective immediately. He will be exiled to the border territories where he can contemplate what his fear cost him. "You're weak," Vesper spat, even as guards moved to restrain him. "The prophecy will destroy us all, you'll see. When every secret is revealed, when compulsion fails, when we can't hide anymore." The prophecy says I bring gentle darkness. Rhea's voice, small but steady, cut through his venom. She stepped forward through her own crystalline barriers as if they were nothing more than curtains. Maybe you should have asked what that meant. She closed her eyes. The moonlight intensified. It spread across the floor like water, climbed the walls like living vines, filled every corner of the vast assembly hall with radiance that should have been agony to vampire senses. But this wasn't harsh daylight meant to burn. This was twilight, the hour between day and night, when the world held both light and shadow in perfect balance. The vampires didn't burn. They stood in gentle darkness without pain, many with tears streaming down ancient faces. Some stared at their hands in the twilight glow, marveling that they could feel light without fear. Others dropped to their knees, overwhelmed by something they'd forgotten existed, the possibility of living without hiding. The prophecy's meaning crystallized in that moment. Not vulnerability. Freedom. The gentle darkness meant vampires could exist in twilight, could walk in the hour between day and night without terror, could live alongside humans without ruling through fear because fear would no longer be necessary. Vesper stared at the light that should have burned him. His ice-blue eyes, for the first time in perhaps centuries, showed something other than cold calculation. They showed understanding. And grief. I spent 2 centuries, he whispered, being afraid of the wrong thing. The twilight held, warm and gentle, while a 6-year-old girl in blue velvet stood at its center with her palm glowing like a crescent moon, proof that the age of darkness ruling through fear had ended and something new, something that could hold both shadow and light, had finally, impossibly, begun. The assembly dissolved into something no vampire present had witnessed in their lifetimes: celebration. Ancient beings who'd spent centuries maintaining careful political distance found themselves mingling in Rhea's twilight, speaking with unguarded honesty because the right's lingering power and the Moonborn's presence made deception feel suddenly pointless. Some laughed. Others wept. All of them stood in gentle darkness and marveled that they were still standing. Lucian ascended the dais with Rhea on one side and Lillian on the other. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone: vampire king, mortal woman, moonborn child. A family that shouldn't exist, standing where absolute power had ruled unchallenged for centuries. We've ruled through fear for so long we forgot it was a choice, Lucian's voice carried across the hall. Today, my daughter showed us a different way. The Shadow Court ends tonight. Tomorrow, we build something new, a Twilight Court, ruled by consent and truth rather than compulsion and darkness. He outlined reforms with the efficiency of someone who'd been planning this moment since Rhea first broke Vesper's mass compulsion. The council would be restructured with term limits. Compulsion use would be banned except in cases of immediate self-defense. The right of unveiled truth would become standard practice for all major decisions. The kingdom would open to peaceful mortal contact, to trade and treaty rather than predation and fear. And Rhea would be raised as both princess and bridge builder, taught vampire law and human compassion, trained in power and in mercy. Not everyone agreed. Several elders rose from their seats with expressions of disgust, storming toward the exits while muttering about the degradation of their kind, about how this would weaken them beyond recovery. Lucian watched them go and made no move to stop them. "We don't rule by forcing compliance anymore," he said simply. "Those who cannot live with truth are welcome to find darkness elsewhere." More stayed than left. Far more. And when the last dissenter departed, the remaining vampires, hundreds of them, stood in twilight and began discussing not what they'd lost, but what they might build. Later, in a quiet corridor away from the celebration, Lucian knelt before Rhea so they were eye to eye. The crescent moon mark on her palm had faded to a soft glow, ever present but gentle now. "I need to ask you something," he said carefully. "Do you wish to be known as mine? Not because of prophecy or political necessity, but because you choose it." Rhea studied his face, the amber eyes that held 4 centuries of life, the silver-white hair, the features that were beginning to feel familiar. "Do you want to be my papa?" Not because I'm Moo-born or because I can do magic things, but because I'm me? Just me? Lucien's voice cracked. Yes. I want to learn to be your father. I want to earn that title every day, not have it given to me by blood alone. Then I choose you, Rhea said, and wrapped her small arms around his neck. I choose us. The mansion responded. Throughout Thornvale, a massive stained glass window that had remained darkened for 12 years, the one depicting a crescent moon rising over thornless roses, suddenly blazed with twilight radiance. Servants who'd worked in the mansion for decades gasped, and word spread quickly. The house itself recognized what had just been chosen. Lillian found them there, surrounded by that impossible light. She and Lucien faced each other with 12 years of stolen time between them, and the silence stretched until Rhea thought it might break. I don't know how to do this, Lillian finally said. I remember loving you. I remember being happy. But I also remember 12 years alone, raising our daughter in poverty while you lived here surrounded by candles, and her voice caught. I don't know how to reconcile those two people I am. We can learn each other again, Lucien offered quietly. Slowly. With truth instead of secrets this time. No pretending the gap doesn't exist, but maybe building a bridge across it. Rhea took both their hands, pulling them together. We're all kind of broken. Maybe we just be broken together until we figure out how to be whole. Lillian's laugh was half sob. She looked at Lucien, really looked, and something in her expression softened. You kept the portrait. For 12 years, you kept it. I couldn't forget, he said. Didn't want to. Then we'll start there, Lillian decided. With what we couldn't forget, even when they tried to make us. 3 months later, Twilight Hall rose where the Shadow Court's assembly building had stood, same Gothic architecture, but with open gates and windows that no longer seemed designed to shut out the world. Mortals and vampires mingled in the courtyard, negotiating trade agreements and cultural exchanges, building something unprecedented in vampire history. Rhea's candles burned in every window, each one a promise that light and dark could coexist. The mansion's eastern wing had become Rhea's workshop. She made candles with Lillian in the afternoons, studying vampire law with Lucien in the evenings, learning to navigate both worlds with the ease of someone born to bridge them. The portrait still hung above the entrance hall fireplace, and sometimes Lillian would stand before it for long moments. It remembered when I couldn't, she'd told Lucien once, and he'd understood. Now, as dawn approached, Rhea led them both to the eastern windows, true eastern windows that faced the rising sun. Vampires throughout the mansion gathered nervously, ancient instincts screaming at them to retreat to darkness. Trust me, Rhea said, and pressed her glowing palm against the glass. Sunrise came. Real sunlight streamed through stained glass depicting twilight roses, and the vampires didn't burn. They gasped, some crying out in shock, but the gentle dawn that touched them carried Rhea's power woven through it. Her abilities had evolved over 3 months of practice, gradually expanding the hours vampires could exist in light, teaching their bodies what her presence had always promised, that they didn't have to choose between power and day. You spent so long in darkness, Rhea said, watching Lucien's face as morning light touched it for the first time in 4 centuries. I think you've earned some mourning. They stood together in growing light, Vampire King with tears streaming down his ageless face, mortal mother who'd survived having her life stolen and found the strength to reclaim it, Moo-born daughter who'd walked into darkness selling 6 candles and emerged carrying dawn. A family forged not by prophecy alone, but by choices made again and again, to trust, to hope, to love despite every reason fear offered to do otherwise. She'd come to sell 6 candles to save her mother, and ended up teaching a vampire king what it means to choose love over fear, truth over lies, and hope over the darkness that had ruled for centuries. The candles still burned throughout Thornvale Mansion, but now they burned in daylight, and that made all the difference. Thank you so much for joining us on Rhea's journey. If you love this story, please give it a like and share it with anyone who enjoys vampire romance, gothic fairy tales, or powerful family stories. Subscribe to our channel for more epic tales like this.